Welcome to another episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. If you notice, I'm inside my vehicle. I used to do this a couple of years ago. The minute that we start getting a little bit of warmer, and I say warmer, relatively warmer, because we're now into the positive temperature values here in Canada. When spring starts out, I would typically drive around, start getting around. And what I did back then was I would do my private Facebook Lives in my private Facebook group. I would pull over on the side of the road and then start doing these. Of course, I don't actually use my phone when I'm driving. And then I would be in different locations sometimes, driving all across Canada sometimes, or not all across Canada, but all across the province of Ontario, or sometimes even the United States. But I kind of miss doing this, so I figured, well, why don't I start doing this again on the road while I'm on my car or rental, probably, I don't know, or maybe on a hike. Today is a day that I did not know existed until like a couple of weeks ago. And it is considered to be World Backup Day. Yes, 31st of March is considered to be World Backup Day, which is kind of interesting because after 31st of March is April Fool's. The idea behind that is, of course, to raise awareness, to protect your data by having backup so you don't become the April Fool's joke the day after. And there's a website dedicated to this, World Backup Day. Just do a quick Google search on it. And it's been going on for almost 12 years now. There was one guy on Reddit back in 2011 who was telling a story about how he lost a lot of photos, documents, videos that he had on his phone. And he was just hoping that he never had to do any of trying to recover the data, if only he had a backup. And so the whole idea behind World Backup Day is to raise awareness and try to do backups. And of course, being the people, the professionals who take care of the data, if you're a SQL Server DBA or a sysadmin responsible for taking care of the data, backup is mandatory. If you're not doing your backups, then you're not doing your job. But beyond doing your backups is also making sure that you're actually testing whether or not your backups actually work. And I mentioned it a couple of times in some of the videos that I've covered. I don't actually believe in backups. I believe in successfully restoring your data from your backups, because what good are backups if you cannot restore your backups, and you cannot restore your data from your backups, right? Now, even in the days of modern days where modern risks are becoming more and more prevalent, like for instance ransomware attacks. I mean, think about that for a second. Ransomware attacks, they affect or target backups even. So what good is a backup if you cannot even use it to restore from your backups, right? So watch out for a lot of people talking about backups today, not just from an end user point of view, because again, we have collected more data than we've ever had. Pictures, social media posts, videos, documents, name it, anything any data that matters to us. We started collecting them, but the last thing we kind of think about is backing up our data. Right, and you know, unlike what most people would talk about regarding consumer data being backed up, I want to talk about how we as data professionals, sysadmins, or people responsible for the data need to bring people together when it comes to doing backups. I just got the statistic from I forgot, PC World. 75%, I don't know how they got the data. 75% of data loss is caused by human errors. Think about that for a second. Human errors. Back then, corruption was caused by, data corruption is caused by different sorts of reasons, possibly hardware failure, memory issues, for instance, with SQL Server. hardware. That's why you do your consistency checking. But it's quite an interesting number. 75% caused by human error, right? And this is the thing. We, as technical professionals, focus so much on the technical implementation of how do we do our backups, how do we do our restores, but rarely do we focus on the people aspect, and that's what I want to that is what I want to focus on today, right? I remember this was one of those cases when I understood how important backups are. And I don't know, maybe it's just me. I don't like the idea of losing something. I mean, losing something does not have anything to do with data at all. Even when I was a kid, if I have a pencil and it's my favorite pencil, I would use it all day, every day. And then I feel so bad about myself when I lose something, right? I haven't lost a wallet. Well, actually I did. There was one time that I was traveling in Europe and then I lost my wallet. There was a really nice guy who found my wallet, got in touch with me. Again, the point is, maybe it's just my personal take on not wanting to lose personal stuff, right? I don't have a lot of personal stuff, but I really feel bad about the fact that I lose stuff, so I take really good care of them. And that behavior, that way of thinking translated into protecting data. And so for me, it has become kind of like a habit, if you may. That's why I remember when I accidentally dropped my laptop. This was back in 2007. It was an Acer Aspire laptop. And back in the days, there were not a lot of solid state drives, so I still had those rotating drives. Fell from a hotel room, from the bed to the floor. It's a carpeted floor. Lo and behold, I can no longer open my laptop, meaning powered up, and Windows wouldn't boot up because the hard drive failed. You know how sensitive hard drives are. You bump it, you drop it, and so I lost that hard drive. The good thing about it is I did my backups. It's part of how maybe it's just part of my personality, part of the habits that I've built over time. But even for instance, the documents that I write, they're getting backed up. I do my own personal backup on a regular basis. But a lot of the people that we work with as IT professionals, they don't even think about that in most cases. And it is our responsibility as IT professionals, again, SQL Server DBA, sysadmins taking care of data, to bring people into the idea that taking care of data is not just our responsibility, but it is not just our, meaning the technical professionals' responsibilities, but everyone's responsibility. I want to talk about 3 things that you can think about today, the World Backup Day. And this is this does not just focus on the technical aspects of how you do your backups, whether you're doing full or differential or a combination of full, differential plus incremental, right? Whether it's database or files or what have you, not just meeting recovery objectives and service level agreements, because that is still a must. You have to be clear on your recovery objectives, recovery point, recovery time objectives, as well as your service level agreements. But rather, I want to focus more on bringing people in as part of this continuous effort to protect the data, right? From the point of view of a backup, right? 3 things. I like talking about 3 things because they're easy to remember. Get your pen and paper ready. Here's point number 1. You got to educate the users on the value of the data, right? Educate the users on the value of the data. Now, it's very easy for us to start writing an email and sending an email to the entire company about how important the data is, because, well, we deal with the data, we know how important how important the data is, but from an end user's point of view, well, they don't really know sometimes. So you gotta educate them from the point of view of where they're coming from. What do I mean by that? Imagine putting yourself in the shoes of a financial or a finance person, maybe the person taking care of your payroll. Imagine putting yourself in the shoes of that person who has to work with Microsoft Excel every day. And imagine what the challenges are for that individual working with the data when all of a sudden he lost a whole day's worth of work, right? That is how you start communicating to the end users, where they're coming from, what their day-to-day looks like. Because again, we can always talk about, we're using NetApp for our storage, we're using enterprise backups, but they don't really care, right? They don't even know what's going on in the network. But what they do know is that when they lose that Excel spreadsheet that they have been working on for an entire day, it becomes frustrating for them. So educate your end users on the value of the data. Talk and communicate based on what they can relate to. Like I said, I use the example of a financial person or somebody from the HR department and use Excel because again, whether we like it or not, people still use Excel. And if you have been working on Excel for an entire day and all of a sudden, the spreadsheet crashes and you can no longer recover, redoing the work that you've spent doing for an entire day is not just frustrating, but of course you kind of forget, okay, what was I working at 12 o'clock in the afternoon? So talk to the end user about the value of the data and do that from their point of view, from their perspective. Make it appeal to them, right? In cases where I have to talk to family members, I talk about how important it is to back up their phones. I mean, it's easy to get fixated on a brand new iPhone, but not think about how you have to back up the data. And sometimes they forget, right? There's a lot of strategies around automatically back up the data to the cloud or stuff like that. But if they're working with different devices, it's kind of hard to do that for them, especially if they're not tech savvy. But just giving them a glimpse of how important data is, making them aware of what happens when they suddenly lose data. Like for instance, again, family members, you can talk about losing a video of an event that involves family members. That for them is huge. Of course, for us technical professionals, like, we can always recover that. Or if it's backed up on the cloud, we can recover that. But for them, again, this could be overwhelming to them, especially your non-tech users, people in the HR department, the finance department, even the sales department. If they're mostly using tools, they're mostly focused on the tools that they're using, not realizing the impact of what it is when they start losing the data. So that's the first thing. Educate your users on the value of the data that they are working on, the data that they have to redo or re-input in case the data gets lost. And again, going back to that statistic of 75% of the data being lost is caused by humans. Yep. So we have to, again, educate them on how important data is. So this is the second one. The second one is to create a process that everyone will follow to make sure that data is being backed up, right? Create a process that everyone will follow to make sure that data is being backed up. What do I mean by that? Well, for one, again, in an enterprise environment, people just assume that data is getting backed up, right? People just assume that data is getting backed up, right? It is very challenging to, excuse me, start telling people about, excuse me, it is very, man, my throat is itching. It is very challenging to keep track of every new employee, telling them exactly what to do, how to do things, and not being aware of what they're doing, right? In an enterprise environment, you may have your own policies. You may have different approaches, but it is important to have a standardized process for how data is being used, how data is being backed up. For instance, and again, I'm not just talking about enterprise data that we take care of, like the databases, the servers, and all of that. I'm talking about the data that end users are responsible for, right? Companies and organizations might start using the concept of user-specific folders. Like for instance, My Documents. The My Documents folder or the Documents folder on Windows could be a shared folder that the user has specific access to. So when they log in, they start saving documents. Every document that they save has to be put on the My Documents folder, right? And this is very important because, again, you cannot control how people do things. For one, I've seen a lot of people with so many stuff on their desktop, like Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, PowerPoint slides, text files, everything on the desktop, PDF files. And then because they're not on a specific folder that the enterprise IT is taking care of, when the time comes that, let's say, the computer crashed, you can no longer retrieve the data or the files that they've stored outside of that folder that you created for them, right? And that's very important, right? You have to communicate. For one, you have to create a process first, right? Create a process. Tell users, tell your co-workers, hey, if you want to save, if you create a new document, if you create a new spreadsheet, this is where you save it. Because this is the only place that gets backed up. We don't back up your local hard drives and all of these. Then again, different organizations have different approaches to this. Some companies would implement some form of a VDI where they would have a virtual desktop interface. They would then have users log into that, and because the VDI environment is being taken care of by the IT team, they're backing up everything, right? But when you're giving users their own tablets or laptops or personal computers that they need to use, you have to create a process for that, right? It is very difficult to keep track of what people are doing every day on their workstations. So you have to create a process and make sure that you communicate that process to them, right? This is where you start implementing Active Directory policies, where you map a specific network drive to a specific user, and only that user would have access to it, stuff like that, right? It just makes backing up or creating backups of the files that they've created a lot easy when you have a certain process in place. So that's the second one. Create a process and communicate that to the end users, right? We started off with educating the end users about how data or how valuable the data is and what's the cost of losing the data. And then you create a process that they would have to follow, the end user will have to follow as part of your attempt to protect the data. And again, end user data versus enterprise data, we're, as technical professionals, we're the one responsible for taking care of enterprise data, like the data in the databases or the servers, but we still have to protect the data from the end user's point of view, like their Excel spreadsheets. And so following that process makes it easy for us to do what we need to do on behalf of the end users, right? When I was working as a data center engineer, what we did was we standardized on having two partitions for workstations, the C partition and the D partition. Every data gets stored in the D drive, meaning end user data. And what I mean by end user data is, again, your PDF files, your Word documents, your Excel spreadsheets, everything's on a D drive, and that D drive is actually mapped to a network file share specific to that user. So now, anything that the user does, we tell them, look, save your files on a D drive, if anything goes wrong, we can help you recover it. Anything outside of the D drive, well, good luck. Can't help you with that. Which leads me to the third point. The third point is to make backups a shared responsibility, right? You've heard of this phrase, shared responsibility, when it comes to cloud resources. Every cloud provider would tell you about a shared responsibility. In the same way, we have to treat backups as a shared responsibility. Going back to the first and the second point, you have to educate the end users how important backup data is, the impact of what it is when they lose their data, and then you have to create a process. Anybody that has to work on corporate resources like company laptop, company desktop or tablet or any computing device, any employee working with company resources needs to follow these processes. And so in order for them to take advantage of their data being backed up, they need to be part of sharing the responsibility for backing the data. And again, I used that example earlier. If the user saves their documents on the desktop, well, we don't back up the desktop. We tell them that. Sorry, can't help you with that, right? It's no different from you doing something on, let's say, a SQL Server configuration. You went outside of what is considered to be a supported configuration. You call Microsoft support, they'll tell you, sorry, you can't support you because, well, this is an unsupported configuration, right? Same thing. After educating your users about the importance of data, after creating a process and communicating that process to the end user, make sure that they actually follow those processes by letting them know. It is a shared responsibility, right? And simple as it may seem, saving files, not from the desktop, not from the C drive, but on the D drive, as what my example was earlier, saving documents on the D drive is an example of shared responsibility, because now you have to constantly be aware of, hey, where am I saving this document? Am I saving it on the C drive? Am I saving it on the desktop? Am I saving it on the D drive? And again, make it a part of shared responsibility. A lot of the times, again, it's tempting, right? It is tempting to just let end users do their thing, right? But when we explain, look, it is a shared responsibility. You got to do your part. Otherwise, we won't be able to do our part properly, right? It is important for them to realize that, sure, we IT professionals are able to take care of your data, but in order for us to be able to do what we need to do, you got to do what you need to do, right? Doing things outside of, again, defined processes or defined policies could be considered unsupported from our point of view. Again, this is beyond what a lot of people do, because sometimes they would say, oh, this is just help desk stuff. Let the help desk people take care of this. I'll just worry about the enterprise side of things, like backing up the databases, backing up the network resources, servers, configs, and all of that. But at the end of the day, the end users are the ones using the resources and the services that IT provides. So in order for them to really be aware of the services and the resources that we provide, we have to set the guidelines. That's why I pointed out in item number 2, creating a process and communicating that process so that they would be able to follow those processes, and also setting the expectations. If there's one thing that I've learned working in IT, it's this. It goes beyond technical services delivery. It goes beyond knowing how to manage your databases or managing your servers. But IT is really all about managing expectations, right? Setting the expectation, communicating that expectation, and providing the services, the capabilities, and the resources to the end users that would meet those expectations. Like I said, going back to that example, if we say okay, we created a departition. This is where all of your documents need to be saved. Anything other than, and we also tell them, look, at the end of the day, when you log off of your computer, it automatically backs up the data for the entire day. Or we tell them, look, every 4 hours we back up the data from the D drive, right? If you power down your computer before the time that we back it up, we might not be able to back it up, right? So a lot of these things will help you create not just a better backup experience, but also setting the expectation to the end user. And again, today in today's World Backup Day, we have to go above and beyond just providing resources and providing support for enterprise data, but more so for end user data, because at the end of the day, they're the ones using the IT resources, whether it's an ERP system that connects to the backend database. Well, they're the ones using it, and if they cannot retrieve part of the data that they're working with alongside with enterprise resources that we provide, for them it's just like, okay, I cannot do my work because the file's lost, right? Educate the users on the value of data, how important data is. Create processes that would allow them to follow these processes to make sure that the data is actually being backed up properly, or the data is being taken care of. And number 3, make backups or creating backups a shared responsibility. And notice that I didn't talk about the how things, because these are all part of how the company is structured, what policies you have in place. There are certain best practices, but again, start with what you already have. Maybe implement tools or implement processes that you want to incorporate within your internal best practices to make sure that end user data is protected the way your enterprise data is also protected, right? And that is about it for World Backup Day. Like I said, you'll hear a lot of people talk about backing up end user data or consumer data. For me, it's a combination of really focusing on the human aspect and getting people involved, your end users specifically within the internal organization, on how to be a part of making backups work. Again, the last thing you want is for people to think about, hey, my data is supposed to be backed up, and not being able to restore it because they're not doing their part. I kept highlighting in the past that high availability and disaster recovery is a team sport. Even your end users are part of this team. They need to be aware. They need to be a part of making this endeavor something that they can take advantage of, as well as they can benefit from, but only if they do their part, right? That is about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HA, the R show on World Backup Day. Tune in again next week for another topic of conversation where I talk about SQL Server high availability in disaster recovery, or high availability in disaster recovery in general, but from a practical point of view where you can take action on the lessons that you learned so you can make the most out of your high availability solutions and prevent stuff like losing data. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you again on the next episode.